Let's discuss what to do when you're asked to describe a distribution. You should put your socks on. So socks is a way that we remember shape, center, spread, and outliers. We just spell it as socks to help you remember the phrase. So for the first S, that is considered our shape of our graph. The shape is normally going to be these three options, except for on rare occasion. So it's either going to be approximately normal, skewed to the left, or skewed to the right. And then every now and then you might see a graph that might be bimodal or uniform. And then symmetric is another way you could call something approximately normal. But some things that are approximately normal are not quite symmetric. So we don't always use that word interchangeably. And then for outliers, outliers is one of those tricky words where you don't want to use it unless you're certain that something is an outlier. You want to call it a potential outlier unless you can perform the calculation to prove that it's an outlier. So to prove it's an outlier, any number that's greater than your quartile 3 plus 1.5 times the IQR, which is the Q3 minus the Q1, would be considered an outlier, and anything less than the first quartile minus 1.5 times the IQR would be considered a lower outlier. And if you've done those calculations, you should always leave them on your paper for proof of the reason why you're calling those numbers outliers. Don't ever erase that or leave it out of your work. So then you could definitely call something an outlier if it falls into those two categories. But if you cannot see them or you cannot justify that they're an outlier, it's always safe to say that they are a potential outlier or that there are no known outliers or no apparent outliers or no potential outliers, just to put that in there as, there could be, but there's not anything that you can tell is there. Then for the center, this is very important to pick out the right version of center. So if your shape is approximately normal, you should use center as mean, or use mean to describe your center. Because when it's approximately normal, mean is the best representation of that center because we can use mean when it has that shape. But when it is skewed, we cannot use mean because remember, mean is non-resistant to those extra values that are making it skewed. So we want to use median. So whenever your data is skewed, use median. And whenever it is approximately normal, you would automatically want to talk about the mean as your center. And you would never want to mention both in one set of data unless there is some strange reason why they gave you something that is perfectly normal. And then you'd probably still just want to talk about the mean. But like I say, that's not going to happen. And then for your spread, spread is always something that we want to talk about more than just the range. Range is a good starting point, and sometimes it can actually stand out as a good point to make, but it's not the only thing we use to describe spread. When you have data that's approximately normal, you want to discuss the standard deviation of that data. Is it a large standard deviation and therefore it has a high range of values, a high variability in your data? Or is it a small standard deviation, which makes all your data closer to the mean and less variable? Then those are strong statements you can make about your data based off your standard deviation. And remember, you don't have to have all your data points in order to find standard deviation. You can sketch over like a histogram and estimate standard deviation based off of what you know about a normal distribution curve. When your data is skewed, you can discuss the interquartile range, the IQR, or the 5-number summary. But keep in mind that the 5-number summary, you should never just list those things. Don't list the minimum value, the Q1, Q3, etc. Describe what is that telling you. Is all of your data toward the upper end of the scale? Are all of them older people? Do people make less money overall? Like, what are those numbers telling you? So use those numbers to interpret for spread, and you don't have to list everything you see. A couple good statements about spread is enough. So if you list that your middle 50% of your data falls between, 30,000 and 60,000 for their annual income, that's a good statement. And then maybe list one more thing, but you don't have to go on and on about spread. Just some solid points are good to make. And don't leave it as just range because that's not quite enough to cover what the spread of the data will look like overall. And what did it tell you? That's what you're looking at for spread. So like I say, when you're asked to describe a distribution, you want to always put your socks on. So always think shape, center, spread, and outliers.